World War II was marked by numerous significant battles that shaped the course of history. Among these, the Siege of Budapest stands out as a brutal and pivotal engagement that encapsulated the horrors of war and the resilience of those caught in its midst. The Siege of Budapest remains a stark reminder of the devastating impact of war on cities and their inhabitants. In common with the rest of the world, Hungary during the 1930s suffered a significant financial depression. Its government's response to this crisis was to increase trade with Italy and Germany, and these trade deals were followed by political settlements orchestrated by Germany, which resolved several territorial disputes Hungary had with its neighbors Czechoslovakia and Romania. Almost inevitably, Hungary paid for these successful interventions by an unwilling alliance with the Axis powers. And in 1941, her troops participated in the invasions of Yugoslavia, Operation 25, and Russia, Operation Barbarossa. By the summer of 1944, it was becoming clear that the destruction of the Third Reich was simply a matter of time, with British and American forces advancing from the west, and the rampantly victorious Red Army threatening Germany both in the north and from the Romano-Hungarian border in the south. Seeing what the future must inevitably hold, Miklos Horthy, the Hungarian admiral and statesman, once again opened secret peace negotiations with the Allies, the terms of which were agreed upon on the 11th of October. In response, Hitler, with Austria and Bavaria under threat from the Soviets and 1 million German troops cut off in the Balkans, invaded Hungary once again. This time, however, he made no pretense about retaining an unwilling puppet government in power. Horthy was arrested barely minutes after a radio broadcast in which he had declared a truce with the Soviets. The pro-Nazi Arrow Cross Party replaced his government, and Horthy himself was forced to sign a document renouncing the Soviet agreement and abdicating in favor of the Arrow Cross leader Ferenc Szalasi. With Horthy held prisoner in Bavaria, significant elements of the Red Army, led by Colonel Rodion Malinovsky, crossed the border and began to move towards Budapest to isolate the Hungarian capital from the remaining Axis forces in the country and gain control of the main road into Austria, running from Budapest to Vienna. Soviet and Romanian troops and tanks entered the capital's eastern suburbs on the 7th of November. Still, despite vicious fighting, it was only when Soviet General Fyodor Tolbunkin's men reached the Danube after liberating Belgrade that Malinovsky had sufficient troops to launch a two-pronged attack on Budapest from the north and south. This operation began on December 19th, and 7 days later, on the 26th of December, the city was encircled entirely, trapping an estimated 70,000 German and Hungarian troops inside the pocket the Soviets had formed. The Red Army's culminating operation was to cut that vital road link between Budapest and the Austrian capital. As a result of this encirclement, over 800,000 civilians and troops were also trapped in the city. The Soviet offensive to encircle Budapest began on December 29, 1944, with multiple Soviet fronts converging on the city. The encirclement was completed by January 17, 1945, isolating German and Hungarian forces within the city. The Axis defenders attempted to hold on to a defensive perimeter within the city, known as the Budapest cauldron. The Soviets launched a series of attacks to break through the defenses and capture the city. However, the assault was hampered by the strong fortifications created by the defenders and the urban terrain. The city's layout and architecture made it difficult for the Soviets to employ traditional military tactics. The narrow streets and tightly packed buildings made deploying tanks and artillery effectively challenging. The battle often involved intense street fighting, where every building and street corner became a potential battleground. Both sides used buildings for cover and established snipers' nests, turning the city into a maze of deadly traps. The close-quarters combat resulted in widespread destruction of historical landmarks, infrastructure, and residential areas. Iconic buildings like the Hungarian Parliament and the Castle District suffered significant damage. Civilians trapped within the besieged city faced dire circumstances. Food, water, and medical supplies became scarce commodities. Many people were forced to live in basements and makeshift shelters to escape the constant shelling and bombing. The harsh winter weather further exacerbated the suffering. Lack of heating and proper clothing led to additional hardships for soldiers and civilians alike. The Axis powers launched several attempts to break the siege and relieve Budapest. Operation Konrad, for instance, was a series of German counteroffensives aimed at lifting the encirclement. However, these efforts were largely unsuccessful due to the overwhelming Soviet strength. The Germans and Hungarians also attempted to establish an air bridge to supply the trapped forces by air, but this proved insufficient to meet the needs of the encircled troops. As the siege dragged on, it became clear that the Axis forces could not hold out indefinitely. After vicious fighting and the loss of tens of thousands of both soldier and civilian life, February 13, 1945 saw the remaining defenders surrender to the Soviets. The surrender marked the end of the battle, but the human and material costs were staggering. The city was left in ruins, and the civilian population suffered immensely. The Siege of Budapest had profound implications for World War II. The Soviet victory weakened the Axis powers' position on the Eastern Front and accelerated the Red Army's advance towards Germany. The battle also symbolized the brutality of urban warfare and the immense human suffering that accompanied it. The legacy of the siege lives on as a poignant reminder of the price of conflict and the imperative to strive for peace and understanding in a world scarred by the horrors of war. Make sure to let us know your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel as a sacrifice to the gods of the algorithm. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.